Okay, so let's start with, and prep test A, we'll start with the logical reasoning, and basically we'll stay with it until you have exhausted what questions you have. Again, I urge you, with the caveat that everything's on video, right? But I urge you, it's much more valuable to understand why you got question number 11 wrong, and again, I'm not, just overall, right? Than why you got question number 22 wrong, right? You're much more likely to improve your actual score by taking material that you just slipped. Maybe you didn't read textually enough, whatever, but it's material you're capable and competent to do, and you just slipped. Now, having said that, I'll be happy to try to explain, any number on there. But with that, what do we have here? Do we have any questions with respect to section 1, logical reasoning in prep test 80?
Number 10.
Number 10. Okay, so again, IRAC. The only reason I look at a law is because a client has an issue. Okay, so the only reason I'm looking at question number 10 is to which one of the following claims, which one can most justifiably be rejected on the basis of the statements above. So that issue is funky. Yes, yeah, so you say, okay, it's funky. And then you say, but do I understand it? Yeah, so you could put I might put a flag there and say, not because I think I'm gonna get it wrong, not even because I may get it right in 45 seconds, but the issue is funky. So that might get a flag. Because I don't want to mess up my momentum. That word momentum needs to be running through your mind in this first go-around, right? But I understand it, right? You're saying, which one of the following claims, which one can be rejected? Okay, I got it. So I'm going to read something, and then somebody's going to make a claim, and I'm going to say, no, I can reject that claim based on what I just read. Okay. Creating a database of all plant species in the scientific record has proven to be no easy task. Stop. I got it. Okay. Not really interested in it, but I got it. So it's not been an easy task to create a database of all plant species, and I imagine we're going to find out why. For centuries, botanists have been collecting and naming plants without realizing that many were in fact already named. Okay, I understand that, right? Because they're all over the world, and one doesn't know, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So now we have different names for the same species. And by using DNA analysis, botanists have shown that varieties of plants long thought to belong to the same plant species actually belong to different species. Okay, and all that makes the case for the argument's conclusion that creating a database is no easy thing. Okay? And you basically give me two premises on which to draw that conclusion. First being, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing, so some botanists in France and some botanists in Australia see the same thing but give it different names. And then your second fact is that now we learn through DNA that plants long thought to be the same or different. So that does sound like challenging now to label all these plants. Okay. So which one of the following can most justifiably be rejected? Which one of the following claims can most justifiably be rejected? Okay. And A says, most of the duplicates and omissions among plant names in the scientific record have yet to be cleared up. I wouldn't reject that claim, would you? No. B, would I reject this claim? An accurate database of all the plant species in the scientific record can serve as an aid to botanists in their work. I certainly wouldn't reject that. Is everybody okay with this? If you follow along, right, and you read the way we're trained to read, yeah, I wouldn't reject that claim, but you need to go slowly. See? Duplicates and omissions in the scientific record also occur in fields other than botany. It's not a claim I would reject, right? I mean, I have no information. It seems like a reasonable thing, so I certainly wouldn't reject it. D, botanists have no techniques for determining whether distinct plant species have been given distinct names. But you told me right in here you had DNA analysis. So this is a claim I would reject. Because
Also, they said that botanists have been collecting and naming plants without realizing that they were in fact already named. What's
Right.
it called? So I guess they did realize eventually that they were already named.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, if you just look at the two facts, the first fact is, as I'm characterizing it, you know, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. And so again, I'm thinking, yeah, there's some botanists in France and some botanists in Australia. They got the same bloody plant in front of them, but they don't communicate. Maybe they couldn't communicate. And so they give the same plant different names. And that's a fact, right? Then you said to me, and oh, by and by, the ones we thought were the same, before we had DNA, we now have DNA, and they're not the same. But I'm reading DNA as a technique. So this says botanists have no techniques, but they do. They have no techniques for determining whether distinct plant species have been given distinct names. I think they do. And even if I didn't come to that, I would at least come out agnostic. In other words, I would at least come out and say, well, it wasn't A, and it wasn't B, and it wasn't C. So I would continue to read E. Then E says, a person who consults the scientific record, looking under only one of a plant's names, may miss available information about that plant. Sure. That's not a claim I would reject. That's a claim I would embrace based on what I read. So when I look at number 10, I go back. I would not have formed the answer in my mind. In other words, I would not have the words, right? That doesn't mean I'm not going to get it right. That means my approach to it is slow, right? Because I can't be as aggressive as I would like to be because I haven't formed it. But here, then, just being careful and reading slowly, is it like crystal clear to me that D is the answer? 100% clear? Nah, no. Is it overwhelmingly clear based on A, B, C, and E? Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So, again, just it's all IRAC. It's just all IRAC. It's just, you're gonna read this way in law school. What we're doing here, I promise you, exactly what you're gonna do in law school and exactly what you're gonna do as a lawyer. Okay? Other questions from section 1? Yell at me, Jocelyn.
16.
1-6?
Yeah.
Okay, 16. Okay, 16. Which one of the following most accurately describes a flaw in the administrator's argument? So I have my marching orders, I have the issues, I'm looking for a flaw. And here's my administrator. According to the latest figures, less than one commercial flight in 2 million strays off course while landing, a number low enough to allow runways to be built closer together without a significant increase in risk. Stop. Kind of reminds me, I think we did one last week, didn't we? We were talking about LaGuardia Airport and upgrading the most modern technology or something, you know, it's like that one. But if you stop, right, and say, well, what did I just read? Would it be fair to say we've been directed, Jocelyn, to latest figures?
Yeah.
Well, but I want you to pay attention to that. According to the latest figures, we haven't given any source for those figures, have we? Okay. So, but according to those figures, we have some information, right? And that information is that the chance, basically, that a commercial flight is going to be off course is negligible. So I got it. That's your first sentence, right? But then that information has to be correct. So in other words, your latest figures have to be accurate for the statement to be accurate. Next sentence. Opponents of closer runways claim the number is closer to 1 in 20,000. Well, now wait a minute, that's quite different. But this figure is based on a partial review of air traffic control tapes, and so is relatively unreliable compared to the other figure. Now I'm stopping here, and again, do you see how it gets quite wordy, right? And for me, I'm going to use that comma and say stop. Let me make sure I understood what I just read. So there's a countervailing claim, right? It's not 1 in 2 million, it's 1 in 20,000. So I got that. And whoever's writing this now chimes in and says, but that figure about the 20,000 is based on a partial review. And that's fair. So I accept it. I accept it's a partial review of what? Air traffic control tapes. Okay. And then I have the argument's conclusion. And so it's relatively unreliable. So I imagine the position is it's unreliable, not because it's air traffic control tapes, which seem quite reliable, right? But because it's a partial study. I imagine. But I've got it. You give me a partial study. You say, here's a partial study. But I would want that person to show me it's unreliable. Notice the person just says, and it's unreliable. Well, you need to show me it. Because I don't really know what the word partial means. Could partial be 94%?
Yeah.
Could partial be 4%?
Yeah.
What's partial? So, okay, but I'm reading it this way because the argument is flawed, right? So we know it's flawed, so I'm not reading it as an agnostic. Okay, so you say to me it's relatively unreliable compared to. So you're going to push something down and lift something up. Okay. It's relatively unreliable compared to the other figure, which is based on a thorough study of the flight reports required of pilots for all commercial flights. Got it. The argument is flawed. The argument's conclusion is it's more reliable for us to rely on the completed reports, completed flight reports required of pilots. Yes? No, it's flawed. That is not more reliable because we're told it's flawed. Yes? Okay. So now you come up with a reason. Would it be fair to say that flight data has no skin in the game? That is subjective and credible. If you have a flight data recorder, is it fair to say there's no human influence on that? Talk to me.
Yes.
Are you saying yes? That's it. Help me. A flight data recorder, right? Does it have an opinion of anything?
No.
Does it have a point of view of anything?
No.
Does it have any skin in the game?
No.
Okay. But we're now comparing a partial review, right, of that source with what appears to be a more complete study of flight reports required of pilots.
No.
Do pilots have skin in the game?
Yes.
If you were up there and you were kind of like going 300 yards to the left, as I go to the right, if you go 300 yards to the left, when you fill out your report, might you forget you did that? Doesn't the pilot thing bring in a human element? And the only reason I'm analyzing it this way is because of the issue. It's so terribly important. Of course, I would never know how to analyze this. If somebody said just read this, right, I'd be in a very different place. But I wasn't told that. I was told there's an issue. Identify the flaw. The argument's conclusion is don't rely on the partial study. So you have to be able to pick up the conclusion, right? That conclusion is wrong, because the argument's flawed. So either this answer choice has to make more robust the information you got with respect to the data from the actual airplane, right? Or it's got to take out that the pilots have skin in the game. And that's it. Now I got it. I'm sorry?
You made it clearer for me.
Does that mean you see it now?
Yeah.
Oh, yay. So now, if I were looking at this, but again, that has to be done, because when you do the analysis and you form the conclusion, you're in a position to reject anything that doesn't comport with that. The argument presumes, without providing justification, that building runways closer together will encourage pilots to be more cautious while landing. It makes no such assumption. B, the argument overlooks the fact that those who make mistakes are often unreliable sources of information about those mistakes. Who made the mistake? Pilots. And who might be unreliable about reporting the pilots. Yeah, so they made the answer choice. I think the wording, I think it was quite complicated.
Yeah, it was right.
But again, think about the exam. Think about the difference between what we can do in here, which is basically improve your skills at reading, right? As a lawyer. And then, but don't forget, when you get on the exam, it's not about getting question number 16 right unless you can do that in a reasonable period of time that comports with the larger plan.
Well, the reason why I asked you, because usually I get my law questions correct, and this was like the first time in a long time I got one wrong.
That's okay. You want to do that with relationships in life, and you'll be very happy. Okay, so that's 16. Anything else? Is that it? This is your check. Again, if you've got stuff wrong from 1 to 10, now's the time. Said
Question 19,
question
please. 19.
19. Don't like me? 19. I have to work at 19. I have to work at all this. Which one, if filing, if true, casts the most doubt? So again, I have my issue, right? I want to weaken this. So I'm going to read a politician's argument. I'm going to have the politician up on the stand, and I'm going to cross. So my mind is set, my psychology is set. I'm not there to be fair. I'm not the judge. I'm the prosecutor. I'm cross-examining someone. Judge gets to be fair. Jury gets to be fair. I get to try to tear your head off. But I mean, that psychology is important. If you can do that on this test, it focuses you like a laser beam on what you're doing. So I'm going to hear what the politician, I'm going to read it, and I'm going to read the reasoning. I'm not going to, I'll say, okay, let me see what the problem is here. Politician, of the candidates running, Thompson is the best person to lead this nation. You stop. So I translate that into fuck Thompson. And I'd be reading the test, and that's how my mind would work. He's not the best. But now I'm going to get the reasoning for why he's the best. But that reasoning is what the reasoning I'm going to attack. Here's why Thompson's the best. This is what we're crossing. For one thing, Thompson opposes higher taxes. Well, stop right there. Would it be fair to say that whoever wrote this is now saying that opposing higher taxes is an attribute of a best candidate? So if in fact, someone supported higher taxes, we would weaken this argument. Okay. So for one thing, Thompson opposes higher taxes, whereas the other candidates support them. But now you have to make the case that the best candidate is a candidate who opposes higher taxes. And again, you forget about real life, just it doesn't matter. Next sentence. Many would agree that anyone who opposes higher taxes will make a better leader than someone who supports them. Well, many would agree that now we go back to higher taxes, right? But now we're connecting higher taxes to a better leader. So I now in that sentence want to attack the connection between, in fact, is evidence that you oppose high tax also evidence of you being a better leader? Because you haven't given me any, you've just stated it. All right. So I'm going at this two ways. One is just you have to support your claim that the opposition to higher taxes is what the best candidate would do. And you also have to support your other claim that the opposition to high taxes makes you a better leader. Because these are just claims, they're unsupported, they're just, okay.
So, I have a question. So when he said that statement, the last one, many would agree, he's saying against what he says other people are in, is that like what he's saying, that many would agree? So he's not talking about his view, he's talking about others.
Well, for sure, when he's saying many will agree, I mean, the statements are in harmony with one another. The second and the third sentence are harmonious. That is to say, the second sentence says, I mean, his conclusion is Thompson's the best candidate. Okay. And now comes the evidence, right? So the first piece of evidence is he's the best candidate in that he opposes higher taxes. Now he builds on that and further says, and in addition to that, many people would agree, right, that opposing higher taxes causes you to be a better leader. So when I'm looking to attack this, those are the two statements. One, either it's a false claim, right, that most people do oppose higher taxes. Or two, in the alternative, it's a false claim that merely opposing, the fact that, you claim many people see that, and that causes you to be a better leader doesn't make it so, right? So that's where I'm looking at, I'm attacking based on the evidence presented. Well, hang on, Russ, let me just go through this. So let me see, so A says here, opposing higher taxes is not a factor contributing to good leadership. That absolutely obliterates the third sentence. You see, if you just look at how you weaken an argument, if you're doing a trial and you have a witness's grand jury testimony, which you very likely will have, you may well write out that testimony, and then you're breaking it down by what was the witness's conclusion, which is maybe they made an identification, right? But then you're saying, well, what was the basis for the conclusion? And then you're writing out the evidentiary basis. And when you do cross-examination, you attack the evidentiary basis. That's where your cross-examination goes. So that's what it's a gorgeous test, at least from the perspective of a trial attorney. It's just an absolutely gorgeous test. You have a conclusion, and you have two unsupported claims, right? If you weaken either of those unsupported claims, you weaken the conclusion. No, I'm sorry, Russell.
Oh, yeah, no, so I was confused just about, I think I see it now just because, of course, it's a sufficient condition for good leadership, but you can even cast more doubt if it's not even correlated with leadership to begin with, right? So that's why A would be a better choice than B, right?
Well, I'll look at B, but but what I want you to get is the principle as opposed to this specific example. That the principle in all these is the same, right? The principle here is saying this is construction of the argument. We have a conclusion. All right. But now you're a lawyer, right? So it's not that you hear a conclusion and it's hugs because it's something you like to hear. Or it's because all of your peer group members, or most of them, right, agree and embrace that conclusion. No, that's what you're leaving behind. Now you're saying anytime you hear a conclusion, which you have to recognize as a conclusion, right? Now you're saying the requirement for, this is not an opinion, it's a conclusion. An opinion doesn't require anything. An opinion, it can be baseless. conclusion is part reasoning, right? So then you're saying, okay, I'm requiring now evidence. To weaken an argument is not to identify a flaw in an argument. To weaken an argument, all that means, right, is you move the arrow that way. You make it less likely. That's all. It doesn't mean you defeat it, right? But you start off with probability, nothing is 0 and nothing is 100, not inferentially, right? So when you weaken an argument, all it says, well, do I move this arrow to the left? Do I make the conclusion somewhat less likely, right? Do you see what happens here? Answer choice A is a frontal assault on this piece of evidence. All right? So when you weaken, if these are the two pillars that have been constructed to support this, right? And you go after that second pillar, and you weaken it. You take some concrete out of it, you take some mortar out of it, right? It is now problematic. It was a weight-bearing wall, now it's not. Then you weaken the conclusion. So what I want to get to you is that's the way you need to read this text. It doesn't matter what the words say. It doesn't matter what the argument is, right? This I can do. You don't need Aristotle to do it. But you do need to be disciplined. So I look at A, I'm not saying I would say that's it, I'm done. I think I would continue to read. But does everybody get, the principle is that answer choice A identifies a specific piece of evidence designed in the original argument to support the conclusion, yes? This was designed to support that, right? Okay. But now we're crossing this witness. So I'm now looking for a piece, I want to attack either here or here, right? But A attacks right here, and it attacks very effectively, because essentially it obliterates it. But if I did keep reading, and I read B, and B says, no, being opposed to higher tax is not a sufficient condition for good leadership. It doesn't have to be a sufficient condition. It doesn't have to be a necessary condition. It could be a permissive, I mean, think of conditions, right, as permissive, necessary, and sufficient. And in the real world, there's a hell of a lot more permissive than necessary or sufficient, right? You can build a case with no necessary conditions. You can build a case with no sufficient conditions. You just build it on permissive conditions, things that you say, well, you didn't have to have that, but you have so much evidence, right, that suggests an outcome, but none of it is required for the outcome, that it becomes persuasive. Again, in law, you're trying a med-mal case, and that's all you're trying to achieve. 50.1%. That's it. You are a million miles away from something that must be true, right? You're simply trying to prove something is more likely than not to have occurred, right? So you don't, so the thing about sufficiency, the thing about necessity, the only necessity in the world of law is that you meet this threshold, right? You gotta get to 50.1. But there's no fact that has to be necessary, there's no fact that has to be sufficient. So, yes? Are we saying yes to the LSAT?
Yes.
The LSAT, your friend?
Yes.
Still want to be lawyers, huh?
Yes.
It's more muted than the first time I asked that. I did that I was up at Pace yesterday, they had the open house with a large group. But that's my opening, is you guys want to be lawyers, and like they're too embarrassed to say no. You know, so everybody said yes, no, I can't hear you. You know, oh yeah. You gotta want this. You really do have to want it. Or you're not gonna be happy. You might achieve it, but you're not gonna be happy. All right, anything else? So Russell, this makes sense, yes?
Yeah.
You gotta have one or two more. I mean, you don't have to. Come on. Losers. Oh, that was brutal. It's just like, I was looking at that when I was out in the hall, and I was saying, huh? So 24 you just don't do. You know what I mean? Or what would I say, and when I say that, what do I say to guests? When I say, just say, it was Nancy Reagan's drug policy in 1981.
Just say no.
Just say no. Well, I mean, you know, something can be said to that. It's like, you know. So when I say just say no, what are you supposed to guess? Which letters? A or E. In which case, you would have had a 50% chance of getting this right. But you have to know when to say no. But yeah, this is torture. Somewhere I actually wrote this out. Actually diagrammed it because it was like, you gotta be kidding me. But here's what they did here. If you start out, you're looking for, in 24, a flawed pattern of reasoning most similar to what's above. And so we say, well, what was above? And above we had, Lucia will be attending National University as an engineering major. Stop. And again, there is no time. If you're not going to Yale, you're not supposed to be here. Right? But when you break that down, there's a lot of information packed into that one sentence. Is it fair to say now, Lucinda belongs to a group? Right? In other words, Lucinda belongs to the group of engineering majors. That's Lucinda. And with respect to engineering majors, we know that Lucinda, as a member of that group, will be attending National University. Okay. Next sentence. At National University, so now you're acutely aware they've repeated National Universities. That's linking the two statements, right? You're saying, okay, at National University, most residents of Western Hall are engineering majors, and there's the link to Lucinda, right? You're saying at National University, most, you're not saying all, but most members, residents, right, of Western Hall are engineering majors. So you see the connection. They're drawing the connection here with Lucinda and Western Hall. And then we have the therefore. Therefore, Lucinda will probably live in Western Hall. Okay, therefore, Lucinda will probably live in Western Hall. Now, the thing about the parallel flaw is that you really don't have to understand the nature of the flaw. Like, if you didn't understand why that's flawed, it wouldn't matter. You're really just looking for the structure. But the fact of the matter is, there really is no basis on which to conclude that Lucinda will probably end up in that hall, because there are plenty of other halls. So now you're looking for, we'll just go to the credited answer choice. And I think people assume that because the initial argument is presented this way, which is evidence, evidence, or claim, claim, conclusion, I think there's an assumption that the answer choices are going to be presented to you in the same form. Well, that presumption is wrong. And it's particularly wrong when you're talking about a Yale question. And this, for sure, is a Yale question. And so, while the final sentence is a therefore, if you go down to what they did in E, do you see the therefore? The therefore tells me that our city will probably become a regional economic hub is meant to line up here. You see it? In other words, our city is going to turn out to be Lucinda. And the regional economic hub is going to turn out to be whatever that hall was. But its form doesn't follow the same form. If you look at choice E, it says most cities that are regional economic hubs. Do you get that cities now belong to a class of things, regional economic hubs, the same way that Lucinda belonged into a class of things, engineering students. You see it? So here, but where does the word most structurally appear in the original argument? And it appears here in the second premise, right? So what they did here is they inverted this, right? And so really, if you were to follow this, the order doesn't matter. You know what I'm saying? It's premise, premise, conclusion. It doesn't have to be premise 1, premise 2 in that order. It's just premise, premise, conclusion. So this is Yale, and this gives you an idea of what they do, right? So for me, I'm reading this saying, well, wait a minute. In E, you start off with most, right? So that's actually the second one. So I'm not reading it from that sentence. I'm going to read it from a major shopping mall is now being constructed in our city. That's the second sentence, but it's the first claim. So now you're saying a major shopping mall is being constructed in our city. That's the way I would read it. Now I'm going to go to the first sentence. Most cities that are regional economic hubs contain major shopping malls. Therefore, our city will probably become a regional economic hub. And then, you see the probably, you see the most, you see the initial claim, it's following the same form. There's no reason to be doing that. There's no reason. I mean, other than just to exercise incredibly poor judgment. And that's part of what you're preparing for, right? Part of what you're preparing for is to know what to stay away from, because other people, I mean, you don't know what you don't know. So somebody who's not preparing for the task, not only do they not get to question number 25, but they may well have rushed through a bunch of other questions to get here, and it's just suicidal. All right. Anything else?
Number 20?
I'm sorry?
Number 20.
Number 20, sure. Gauser responds to Patterson by doing which is fine. Okay, so you take a step back. So this is, Gauser's going to have some kind of argumentative technique. Gauser's going to respond in some way. You can respond by, well, you can respond in a whole sort of different ways. Let me see what I have here. Patterson brings our attention to the ever popular bone flutes. Bone flutes dating to the upper Paleolithic, Paleolithic, are the earliest evidence for music.
Okay.
That's the old bone flutes. That's the earliest evidence. And that's the end of data collection. just on that evidence, we go to a conclusion, right? Thus, it is likely that music first arose during this period. So the conclusion that it's likely that music arose is hinged to the premise that the bone flutes are the earliest evidence. Okay, well, what might come to my mind is they may not always be the earliest evidence. Maybe there was something before the bone flute that you don't know about. But let me see. It's not about what I say, it's about what Garza says. So Garza is given this, and Garza says, but the upper Paleolithic is exceptional for the intensive use of bone. So I would stop there. Okay. So he's sort of saying that this may be an exception. Right? But the upper Paleolithic is exceptional for the intensive use of bone, which typically survives well in archaeological context. So the bone that was there will be there. Unlike other materials commonly used for musical instruments such as wood. So the wood's no longer there. We don't have the wood now, but it could well have been there at the time. And so that technique would it be fair to say that it was a second person? Is it fair to say that Garza has brought our attention to a fact not included in the original argument, but helpful in disputing the argument's conclusion?
Yes.
That's the technique. And that's a technique you will use. That's where, again, going to when you build your case, right, and then you stop, you better be careful because there's somebody else on the other side taking the other side. So here, what do we have? A is the technique he's arguing that the body of evidence to which Patterson appeals is insufficient for Patterson's purposes. Absolutely. And I'd be whacking them all on that. And do you get it? Because you're saying the body of evidence is the bone flute. That was your body of evidence, right? And from that, you made a claim. You made a conclusion, right? So that's where music began. You have a second voice come in. The second voice is, hi, time out, I have a question, hi. Yeah, we still have the bone samples, but the wood, that's not going to be around. And the wood would be appropriate for music. So you say, if I had made the original argument, I would reflect on that and say, well, let me pull back. Yeah? So again, for me, again, what do I know, right? But I look at question number 20 and I say, who in this room really can't figure that out? If you took your time, right? If you sat down. 20 is something you can make progress on. 24 is, why don't you just commit seppuku? Just bring in your short stabbing sword and end it all. It's not what you're supposed to be doing unless you're a freak. But if you're a freak, hugs, but yeah, you're gonna have a tough life. Yes, Cindy.
Question 22.
All right, 22. Well, okay, so I got the issue, right? And the issue is what must be true. So I'm going to get 4 things that don't have to be true. And if I can identify the thing that is true, I'm not going to read them. It can only be one thing that must be true. Okay? So if it's clear to me, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for the thing that must be true. If it's not clear to me, I may have to, look at all the choices. Okay. And I do expect this to be difficult. So I have here most of the new cars that Regis Motors sold last year were purchased by residents of Bloomfield. Okay, so they're Regis Motors and Bloomfield. Okay. And most of these were bought by people in Bloomfield. Regis Motors that's last year. I'm sorry, I didn't get that. It was last year. And you know, if you want, you could start putting numbers in here. You can make up, if it's gonna help you understand, right? But again, it's a time thing. But you say, okay, you know, if you put 100 here, right? And you say most, well, then you can make up a number that's consistent with most. Doesn't matter what number you put in there, you just put in the number. And again, this is more the preparation than the execution, but that's how I would, I mean, that to me is clearer when I say most, that's clearer to me than the word most itself, which is okay. Next. Regis Motors sold more new cars last year than in any previous year. Okay, so I don't have to write that. That was your best year. Still, most new cars purchased by Bloomfield residents last year were not purchased from Regis Motors. Okay, so 53 then is less than half of all the cars that were purchased by residents of Bloomfield. Based on my hypothetical, right? We said most of the cars that Regis Motors sold, they sold to these people, right? But now we have the second thing, right? The second thing is, still most new cars purchased by Bloomfield residents were not purchased. So this number here has to be 54 or larger. Meaning an additional 54, right? Meaning the total here would be 107. So if 107 new cars were purchased by Bloomfield residents, right, then it would always be the case that Regis Motors sold less than half of them. So that's where my mind would go. Okay, so now I'm looking for language, but has everybody got this? And if you don't get it, I'll go back. Because I mean, I think this can help in preparation. You know, whether it can help in execution, I don't know. Russell?
Well, just because the dealership sold, most of the cars they sold to were residents of the town doesn't mean that most of the residents of that town got their cars from that dealership. And I think that's what should I say, right?
Right, and I'm saying, so if you just take a fictional number, right? Whatever number you want, right? Just pick 53 out of a hat, right? So long as this number, which is they're buying cars, it's Bloomfield residents, right? But they're just not buying from Regis Motors, right? So long as this number exceeds 53, you're in compliance with this description, right? So then I'm saying, okay, so the total here now is 107, right? But this number's got to be higher than that. Okay. So now I'm just, because I don't know what words they're going to use, but I've got the math figured out.
You can think of it kind of like, you know, like say there's like Huntington Honda, like most of the people that bought the cars from there were from Huntington, but the majority of people that bought cars in Huntington were not from that dealership.
That's exactly right. But it's again going from that to the words they used here. So to make this a statement that must be true, and this is the statement that must be true. There were, I mean, how would I, you know, more cars were purchased by residents of Bloomington than there were cars sold to Bloomington by Regis Motors. Something like that. Regis Motors sold more new cars to residents of Bloomington last year than they had in any previous year. Well, you know, that's not what the second sentence said. The second sentence, they sold more cars, not necessarily more cars to the people of Bloomington. B, the total number of new cars purchased by the residents of Bloomington was greater last year than it was, it doesn't have to be. C, a car retailer other than Regis Motors sold the most new cars to the residents of Bloomingville last year. And the answer is it doesn't have to be most. In other words, it could have been that no car sold more than Regis, but the collective total was greater than Regis. D, the number of new cars purchased last year by residents of Bowieville is greater than the number of new cars sold by Regis Motors. Yeah, that has to be true. Yes?
Yeah, now I see how bad I'm doing it. I didn't see that before.
Yeah, but again, you're making that distinction between, can you get to an understanding when you have all the time in the world, right? And I believe there is a benefit to that in that I can't help but think that I'm less dumb than I used to be because I've worked on more challenging stuff. I just don't see how that correlation doesn't hold, right? That if I can actually, which is really kind of why I'm saying to you guys, if you can listen to the Supreme Court, you're not going to understand. I don't understand. But being the dumbest person in the room when everybody else is really smart is a terrific place to be. And I just really believe to my core, right, that, this exercise in preparation, just don't mistake it for execution, but it prepares you for execution. It improves the execution. Is that okay? You okay? On logical? Because I'm inferring you're going to want to do analytical. Anything else? Okay.